Hi, my name's Mike Godeker. I'm the founder and creator of the Silver Crow Method and the social network Shaman, and I'm with...
Melanie Stewart, also from the social network Shaman and the Silver Crow podcast.
Right, Silver Crow Method and the Silver Crow podcast.
All
So,
those things.
yeah. So today is an interesting podcast, and it's called The Two Agreements. And basically the two agreements that we talk about, I'll get into an explanation of what those are and what they mean in a few seconds. The two agreements that we form, the first and second attention, we call these things in shamanic practice, and how these things, how these early wounds shape how we love and communicate. So there are things that we think we choose in relationships, and then there are those things that our nervous system just chooses long before we had language for something, and we start to ask ourselves where that comes from. Today we want to talk about something that's subtle, but it's powerful. How early abuse and or neglect creates what we call the first and second attention agreements, and how those agreements quietly shape how we communicate and how we understand love. So before we go further, what are agreements? Agreements are things that we learn. The first attention agreements that we learn are when we're children. That means, we take a look at our parents and the culture that we have grown up in and our surroundings, our environment. And these things teach us when we're young how to react, how to fit into society. What kind of things that we do that are acceptable and are not acceptable, what rules and regulations do we need to follow? So if we do one thing, the output that we get is being loved. If we do something else, the output is not being loved or something, punishment or whatever. So what happens when we are in an abusive relationship and then those things start to get taught to us? They will dictate later on in second attention or those second level agreements when we're older about how we form our understanding of the world that we live in and what we understand as communication, normal communication, and love. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll hand it over to you, Mel.
Yeah, so we want to clearly say upfront also that this is not about, reaching back to blame parents or partners or even ourselves. It's just about having an understanding as to why two people can genuinely love each other, but also they're speaking different languages in that relationship.
Yeah, and emotional language, when you hear that, it's really interesting because people say men and women communicate differently and they understand differently. But then there's the next level of that based off of our upbringing, where we've come from, what cultures we're in. That makes those communications that we have with other people, especially in relationships and people close to us that we love and care about, much more difficult. So for instance, when I grow up a certain way and my kids grow up a certain way, if it's different than mine, my way of communicating with them is probably going to be different than what they're used to. So, because first off, I'm the parent of them, but I also bring all that quote-unquote emotional baggage or the things that I was taught as a child that I need to unteach myself, like what is the normal behavior. So the first attention agreement is formed very early when we're children, very, very early. It's not a belief and it's not a thought. It's a bodily conclusion. So if I do this, that happens. If I do this, that happens, right? The nervous system asks that one question: what do I need to do to stay safe and to stay connected to those people that are around me so that I am able to survive and live in this environment as a child? And if love was inconsistent, if it was overwhelming, if it was critical or absent, the answer then starts to turn into something different, like how can I be useful? How can I be quiet? How do I need to be strong? And what don't I need?
Yeah, and this isn't conscious. These agreements are not conscious, and the child doesn't think I'm unlovable. The body learns that closeness costs me.
Mhm.
So love becomes effort and connection becomes vigilance. And that gets mistaken for maturity later on.
Right, and that's a critical thing to understand. So there's so much importance that we know psychologically when we grow up, all the inputs and outputs that we associate with things as children, and how we learn in early ages what is expected of us. But what a lot of people don't realize is if we're in those abusive families or abusive relationships, it skews the way we understand things. And that becomes very critical because a lot of those things later on in life are things like self-sabotage, or why do I react a certain way when someone says something, or why do I feel threatened, even though someone else sees the situation as something completely normal. And a lot of times that goes back to the stuff that we've learned. I mean, for instance, if your parents are abusive and you get hit for every little thing, you learn to understand and interpret what mood are they in, and if they're in the wrong mood, to avoid them. Mm-hmm. And if we're in a relationship where someone sends us that trigger that is deep down emotionally, we start to react that way, and we are trying to protect ourselves against something that may happen based on our past. And that may not be relevant anymore because these people aren't abusive like whoever taught us this language is. And that's when it becomes really, really interesting. So the person grows up believing that, this is just what love feels like. This is the reaction that I get when I love someone. For instance, if your parents beat you, and these are the people that we look at to love us and to accept us, and they don't, they abuse us either verbally or they abuse us physically, then that gets ingrained into your nervous system and everything that you think love is about. So then you automatically associate in love means abuse. So if someone's abusing me, then I know they love me in some way, shape, or form. And in order to get away from that, part of that is journey work and shamanic practice, where we talk about these agreements. And we let go of those negative agreements. For instance, one of those could be, people that love me will always hurt me. And the positive agreement will be, I am safe in the love that I give other people. I do not allow them to abuse me. And if someone does show signs of that, then I will avoid that, or I will tell them where my barriers are. I will not accept it. Or people that I love don't abuse me. They love me and accept me for who I am. Or communicating is always done by yelling. And the new agreement is, I can communicate exactly what I want and feel and love without yelling. If someone doesn't do what I would like them to, then I ask them politely, I give them grace, and I give them that space to basically do the things that they can to make us happy, to make me happy, to make them happy, and to establish that communication in a way that shows mutual respect, mutual love, and a deep connection. So this is, instead of saying this is just what love feels like from the past, this is what I believe now love feels like. It's loving and caring. It's touching each other. It's telling each other how proud we are of them. It's basically saying, how we admire and respect our partners. And this is important language to understand. And we're saying this on the podcast, but it's a process that takes time. It takes multiple sessions to do that. And I'm not saying this completely gets rid of psychological help that we may need, depending on what type of abuse we've suffered. But it adds on top of, or it's complementary to that. So depending on what abuse that was, we do sometimes need additional help, and we're not saying you can only do one thing and you don't need additional help. So, but what they're actually feeling, when they say this is what love feels like, is they are feeling what we call managed attachment, not rest. So managed attachment basically means that when you fulfill what I expect you to do, then I will give you the love that I think you deserve. And you get attached to that. You associate that that's my version of love, and you get attached to the person that's doing that. And then you find yourself in that point where a lot of us that come from abusive relationships or families is, well, if I want to be loved, then my mom or dad has to have this from me. If I want them to communicate to me in a way that is loving, then I have to do this and that to pay for that exchange, right?
Wow. So then that second agreement becomes very tricky because we start to look for ways to build strategies for survival on top of those wounds, that original wound that we have.
Right, exactly. So the first agreement is what we've learned and what we've observed as children. And we don't have that mechanism to say, this agreement doesn't make sense, that one does, or this version of what loving is not correct, because we don't have that other part, that other picture to compare that to, right? So When we build the first agreements, then the second agreements build up on top of that. So as we get older and become adults, the first agreement could be, how do I survive love? The second agreement can be, how do I keep it? What exchange do I have to do to earn that love and respect from someone? Because my past first agreements have shown me I have to pay a cost for something, or I have to give something of myself, or I have to become the martyr in order to deserve love from someone else. So when you hear things like, if I explain better, we'll be okay. If I carry more, they won't leave. If I endure this, it proves commitment.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those are pretty heavy. This is a very heavy conversation. They always are.
Yeah. Yeah, but this really hits home.
Yeah, so hits home. That's where communication starts to skew, right? Because one partner may be saying, I want closeness, and the other hears, I'm about to lose myself. So they withdraw.
Right.
Not because they don't care, but because their body associates closeness with self-erasure.
Yeah, and think about that for a second. Self-erasure, that is such a profound thing to associate with love. So that gets, I'm not saying screwed up, but it gets so warped, your picture of what normal love is supposed to be in closeness, that when you are with another partner that grew up in a more normal or slightly more normal family environment, then you have always that constant friction that's going on. So the one partner thinks everything is okay, but the other partner's like, I'm about to lose this because I don't deserve this person, or they don't love me because they said this, and that. Or, for instance, they're perceiving what I'm doing as something negative, even though what I'm trying to show is that I accept them and that I'm not dangerous and this and that. And these are where these interpretations, they really start to play a major difference. And the interesting thing about this is, in relationships, you don't see this at the beginning. I mean, either you do because it's so extreme, or it's like something that happens over years and years and years where you think everything's okay. And then at some point this pops up, this ghost from the past, and some event happens that starts to spiral. And then you start to pick up all this old stuff that you haven't resolved, and it starts to create this issue, this environment, so that you accept more than you should, or someone abuses you or takes advantage of you or doesn't respect you or something else, at least that's what you think. And then you close off yourself to that other person, and that distance gets wider and wider and wider over the years. And that goes underneath the background because your nervous system is saying, I have to accept this. I have to be the person and shut my mouth because I don't want to lose this person. If I do, then I am nothing. I am worthless. Or I have to accept these things and go through this pain and that disrespect because if I don't do that, they won't love me. And that's, wow, that's really, really profound. And I don't understand why people don't talk about this, because there are many more people that are suffering this than we realize. And we only see like some of the numbers, depression, anxiety, and stuff like that. What we don't see is when we talk about things like intergenerational trauma and how these things are inherited from one generation to another, which is the other reason why our parents abuse us as kids, because they've learned it from their parents, right? And then at some point you go through this process and you say, enough is enough. I have to be the one to change this. Like, for instance, this ends with me, right? So then the tragedy is this. Both people think that they're fighting for the relationship. They're just doing it from different survival agreements, right?
Wow. That's pretty intense.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. And they're doing it without even realizing it.
Yeah.
Which is the main point here. So from the outside, it can look like emotional distance, intellectualizing feelings, needing lots of space, and shutting down during conflict. And the partner may say, why don't you want to open up? Why can't we just work it out?
Right. And what's really happening in this instance is that nervous system that's been taught this stuff in the past, it starts to protect the self that once disappeared to stay attached. And what that means is that small child that got abused in their family when they were younger, we were basically defenseless. We couldn't defend ourselves. There was no one coming there, no knight in shining armor or no Valkyrie warrior that was about to protect us. We had to come to terms with this situation because there was no one that was going to help us at that time. It depends on what generation we are, Generation X, etc. We didn't have a lot of the things back then that people have today, all these opportunities to basically help and resources that people can check out. Back then it was, you were either lucky to have a great family or you were in a family that had challenges and issues and you had to survive somehow. Mm-hmm. And when you go into that survival mode, you're protecting yourself because you've been abused for so long. You're trying to find your self-worth, and when you're in a relationship later on, because of those agreements, if they've not changed into something more positive that serves us better and the web of life, then you are trying to protect yourself against disappearing completely as a person. Because when you're abused, you don't have control. You can't tell someone to stop. They won't. And you're defenseless. So when you're defenseless, you're trying to find any and every way possible to subdue the person that's abusing or hitting you or yelling at you, to get them to calm down in whichever way you can, whether it's through jokes, whether it's through something else, or trying to run away, or whatever it is. You try to do that. And when you're in that situation later on as an adult, that person isn't going to argue. They don't explode. They just go back inside. They go quiet. Because that quietness is how you survived in the past. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean that they don't love the people. It doesn't mean that they don't want these things. It's just they can't do it because those agreements are literally blocking us from understanding, interpreting everything the way it's supposed to be interpreted, right?
Yeah, and that's where resentment grows on both sides. One side feels abandoned and the other side feels consumed. Neither is wrong, but the agreements are incompatible.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a profound statement, that the different agreements, two different people have different sets of agreements because they grew up in different ways, and their model of the world and how they understand and interpret the world is different. So when that is the case, you have to try to figure out a way or system to interpret those messages correctly. So you not only have the difference in men and women think and talk and communicate differently, you have the additional layer of the agreements based off of how you were raised that increase or decrease that understanding dramatically. But also the inner dialogue that we have, and that emotional memory of the abuse that gets triggered with specific words or specific actions, whether they are true actions like that from the abuse or whether they're not, but they're just things that people say that automatically triggers you, and then you're protecting. You're in survival mode. So, and these agreements usually break during moments of loss or stillness. So things like grief, like death, burnout, or sometimes unexpected softness. And that point, grief and death are normal, but burnout is a topic that a lot of people don't really talk about. So there was a time in my life where I started a project, and it was the first time in my life that I felt like what burnout was. And it was so bad at that point in time that I had to leave that project. It was just too toxic for me. It was high hours, it was no appreciation, it was a lot of stress and a lot of things that had to be done, and a different system of doing things. And once you get to that stage, you go into self-protection mode. And that was the first time in over 10, 11 years that I actually had to walk away from a project because it was just too much. There was something about this, that whole entire mix was just too toxic. And I'm not sure if it was necessarily the project itself, but more of being in that moment of burnout, that you are starting to step into a precipice or a dark space, and you have to deal with it. And it sounds easy when you talk on a podcast like this. How do I deal with burnout? But when you're in that situation, you sleep and you're still tired. Nothing really makes sense to you. Nothing really is joyful to you. You've lost faith in yourself and humanity. Getting out of that is a lot of work. Either you have someone and you're lucky enough to have someone help dig you out of that with, the love and the communication and the connection that we need in order to get out of that space.
Right.
Or there's a trigger event that happens that brings you out of that. So when we're in these things, that's a moment where the body feels like, I can be here without performing. And suddenly the system realizes something. So I breathe better alone than together. I feel safer without explanation.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the burnout piece because I was extremely burnt out by the time I closed my juice bar. And so
Mm-hmm.
I can definitely relate to everything you just said about your burnout as well. And it wasn't until I started my journey with shamanism and doing all the journeys and all the work and all the agreements that I started to reclaim my energy back.
Mm.
And I started to feel 1,000 times better.
Yeah,
It's like night and day.
yeah,
The work that I've done to reclaim back my vitality and energy, um, it's been tremendous. So burnout can definitely cloud and fog a lot of things. Um, so, but with the what we're talking about right now, the outside world, to them, this all looks sudden,
yeah,
but internally, it's been forming for years.
yeah.
The body simply reaches a point where it can't keep honoring an agreement that costs too much.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, when you're a practitioner and you're sitting down with a client or a person in a one-to-one, and we start to do the assessment, for instance, what typically happens when I do the one-to-ones with folks on Zoom or in person is I want to get a feeling for the person, for the types of agreements that they may have. And while doing that, I start to form a picture of what are the different types of things that I'm getting a feeling for that we need to work with them with. So for some people, it could be that intergenerational trauma. For other people, it could be that there's anxiety because of things that are going on today in the political environment that we live in. And for other people, it could be a combination of those two or something completely different. And when you understand that, and when you get to that point where, okay, well, it's there, you understand when these things form. Was it a first level agreement or a second level agreement or commanding the second attention? And what are the body cues that you see when people are going through these things? So, and this is the combination where the Silver Crow method really shines. Rather than just doing the shamanic practice, we also rely on, music for healing and relaxation, and also the auricular therapy for the different trigger points that we can help someone in that situation. So there's a lot of different things that we have in the Silver Crow method that we can use to help in this situation. And it's really important to understand how powerful these agreements are and what they can do. It's also important to understand when there's a trigger event like burnout or something else. It could happen that you've been with someone for 10 or 12 or 20 or 30 years, and that one event starts kicking something off, an internal dialogue that you're not aware of. Right now, at that point, you're in that burnout, and you're like in this hole, and all these things from the past, these old agreements start coming up, and then you're like trying to get out of the hole. And the other thing is, as a practitioner, when you're doing these specific healing journeys with people, it's like an onion. It's not that you want to do multiple sessions and you want to make money. It's like you literally have to peel back layers of these agreements, because with me, I still do agreement work with myself, even after like 5-6 years of being a practitioner. And I do a lot of work with other people, but I keep on saying, you need to learn to journey yourself, because when we do these things, especially when we work with agreements, you have to go and journey yourself after we're done with our session and understand what is the personal aspect of this that you need to understand about the agreements that you have with yourself. What was that abusive relationship, or what did that look like, and how do you take that negative energy away from that thing and go towards an agreement that's more positive? So I do a lot of work with people in agreements, and when you're working on those agreements, it's also it equates to soul parts that are returned, that energy, because when you're in that agreement and you've suffered that abuse and that neglect and that trauma, you give part of your energy away from yourself. We call it soul parts, but it's like maybe it's will, it's a part of your energy, your space. And because people disrespected you and you couldn't defend yourself, you give a piece of yourself, a piece of your soul away. And the soul retrieval basically helps us in that regard too, in that we get those things back after we work on the agreement. So there's a specific sequence of doing these things in shamanic practice to actually help people as a practitioner. And that's what we teach, right? That's what we went through too in our courses, and what you do,
absolutely.
and what we do together in one-to-ones with other folks too. So this is important stuff. Anyway, let me get back to the podcast
It
topic.
really is. And even myself doing the Silver Crow method has helped me tremendously, for sure, with my agreements. And the Silver Crow method reframes love completely.
Yeah.
Love isn't endurance, it isn't sacrifice, and it isn't longevity at all costs. Whoa, what? Yeah.
Right. So love is basically co-regulation. It's softness without obligation. It's presence without roles. It's attachment without disappearance. And let's focus on those things for a minute. I mean, they're text, but co-regulation. That we learn to regulate ourselves, and also when we're in a relationship, what are the things that we need to do to basically have that come together in a way that's loving and doesn't extract a price for something, or is not violent, or is not yelling, is not something else. How do we regulate ourselves, and how do we regulate together? The second thing, softness without obligation. Love does not cost you, softness is not supposed to cost a price. Either someone loves you and they accept who you are and they give that softness without expecting something back or without extracting a price. That's important. It's not an exchange. It kind of is, but not the exchange in that I have to pay a price for something. Typically, softness, when it's shown, it's reciprocated because people want to do that. It's not because they feel obligated. It's because they want to. At least that's the way I think it should be. And that presence without a role, you can be in a relationship and be there, and it doesn't mean that you have to perform something in order to earn that love. So often that happens because of the culture that we're in, and when it happens naturally, it's not something that we say, either you do this for me or I don't love you. That's then an exchange, and that doesn't really have to do with a healthy type of love. That's more of like a controlling type thing where we should just get out of Dodge, and that's not something we want to deal with, right? And then that attachment without disappearance. You can love someone and you can submit to someone. It doesn't mean that you disappear as a person. You're still the same person that you are. And when we give ourselves to someone else in a loving type of way, we're attached to them. It doesn't mean that we lose who we are as a person. And if the love and the relationship is on an equal footing with the language and the understanding of what love is, then no partner would ever expect us to lose ourselves just to be together with them.
Yeah, that's amazing. So if you're listening and this resonates, we want you to hear this. You didn't fail because you struggled to stay. You're not cruel because you might need to leave.
Right. And what is the hard truth of this sometimes? Yeah. What's the hard truth of this? And this is where the medicine gets really tough.
It is.
Yeah, because part of it is you want to stay because you're starting to learn these things, but sometimes it's reached a stage where that communication happens when you are what we call in the cave, or when you're alone, or when you are in a different setting to where you were the whole time. And that's where it gets really painful. You ask yourself, why does this price have to be so high for me to change these things that are going on in myself? And sometimes the answer is you're untangling those agreements. And they were made before you even had any choice. So it's not betrayal.
Wow.
Yeah. That's maturation. And the Silver Crow method and Silver Crow itself doesn't ask you to destroy the past. It asks you to stop disappearing in the present. And that requires us to do that work to untangle those agreements. And that can take a while. You know, sometimes there's so many different triggers in whichever environment that we're in that we need to separate ourselves from that environment. in order to do the work. And that's when the medicine gets really tough.
Mm.
You can't always choose that. Sometimes you have no other option but to do this, because if you stay, even if it's a very complex situation, there are multiple people that are impacted by that. If you don't leave, if you don't do that work, you'll get stuck. And if you get stuck and that turns into resentment, then, if you're in that relationship, or if there are kids involved and stuff like that, and you get resentful and you spiral out of control, that's a dangerous situation. That could lead to something that does more harm than the initial pain of leaving does. And that's where all of this gets really, really tough.
Yeah. And sometimes, being true to yourself is the most loving act available.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and letting that sink in for a second, sometimes the most loving act available is when you have to walk away from something. That's a bitter
Yeah,
pill to swallow. Yeah.
it is. Um, yeah. And I think some people will stay, but mask their symptoms, if you will, if you
Hmm.
want to call them symptoms, with things like drinking alcohol
Yeah.
or completely tuning out, whatever way that looks. It could be always at the gym. It could be always going out with friends, not being available, just not being available in presence or even emotionally.
Yeah.
It could be overworking. It could be whatever. But it's not being present,
Right.
and it's
Yeah.
masking these feelings. Um, when there are sometimes people in the couple, someone that is, looking at this and saying, wait a minute here,
Yeah.
I'm losing myself.
I'm
And
losing myself. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I see what's happening here. The other person's losing themselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're not recognizing it.
Yeah. And the really mean thing is, you can love someone so much, and when they're still experiencing that inner work that they're dealing with these agreements, you can't really help them. They have to help themselves. And I know there are people that say, there will be a subset of people that will say, well, go to the psychiatrist and let them help you. Sometimes a lot of the integration, especially with these agreements, is work that we have to do on ourselves. And the question
Mm-hmm.
that we then start to ask is, well, if I stay, will I lose myself even more and something else more drastic happens? Will I get to the stage where I have that second burnout, and that second burnout is so bad that I don't get out of the hole, and then something more drastic happens? Like, if
Right.
you're going to commit something or do something that's not really good for your health, that's the
Mm-hmm.
point where you have to say, if there is a possibility that's healthy for you, that you can stay and you can integrate these things, that's one thing. But if there's a point where you say, I have to go away, I have to go back into the cave, and I have to settle these things, and I'm the only person that can do that because this is from my past and there's different layers that I have to unravel, and I have to do that work, then those are the things that you likely have to do. And I think if you take a look at people that separate or go their own ways, I think a lot of times this is the reason why that happens, right? And I mean, I wish someone would have told me
Yeah.
this like years ago. I wish someone would have told me this like 10 years ago, that, in shamanism, when you start working on your agreements, you can find out about what happened in the past, the intergenerational trauma, all these different
Mm-hmm.
things that you're doing, how these different relationships play into how you form your sense of reality. And then all those things, those self-sabotage moments that I've seen in the past, I could finally understand, okay, well, where did they come from? I mean, I do now to a large extent, but there's still sometimes agreements that you have to work on, where you have to make sure that your inner dialogue is the right one for you, that is in line with you, in line with the web of life, and in line with source, in right relationship. And that's why right relationship, there's another part of this, the shamanic practice of the death of ego. So there are times in our lives where we reach a point where we need to shed the past, like the snake does, or
Mm-hmm.
shed the past in regards to the old agreements and the old trauma and that negative energy. And in order for us to move forward, we talked about this in one of the other talks about cycles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've reached the end of that one cycle where we now finally have to integrate the medicine. And after that cycle is finally
Yeah.
complete, then we can go to the next stage and the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't go into the next stage, that cycle will repeat itself until it gets worse and worse and worse. And there's some people that go through the cycle so often that it leads to them finding no other solution but to terminate going through the cycle. And for the lucky ones, they start to make decisions that are better for those around them, even though at the moment it seems to be something that's very, very painful. And that's a tough decision to make, but at the end of the day, the question is, if you don't do that, will things change positively or will they go downhill until you finally learn the lesson? And if you have to learn that lesson the hard way, how much more painful will it be for the others if you don't make that decision now, right? And that's tough. It's really tough.
Yeah. Um, this work isn't easy.
No.
It's hard work,
But there's
and
light.
but
Yeah,
just there's so much reward
right.
because every time you are able to uncover, unlock, and reveal more of your light that's inside by
Yeah,
doing this work, the lighter you become.
right. So when you do these things too, that's a good point. When you resolve these agreements, even layer for layer, you get the feeling, everyone has a different perception, but I get the feeling once I have these really deep emotional agreements that have been ruling my life and forcing me to act a certain way for such a long time, you notice that release of energy. And the deeper those agreements go and the associated trauma and soul loss they have, the more profound it is when you finally learn those lessons and you get to the next level. It's like someone hooked you up to the next higher volt battery where you're starting to be in tune to what's supposed to happen. And the connections that you have in the past, it doesn't invalidate them. They don't go away. They don't get forgotten. They're still there. And that part of your
Mhm.
history and your life always remains that way. You will always have those connections. But when you do this inner work, you become a better connection to them too. You become much more present in your life, even though you may not have the same connection that you did previously. And that's where this medicine starts to get very, very positive, where you can see those results happening over time, that you're more present, you're happier, you don't get irritated, you start to understand things better. You no longer do self-sabotage, and you're opened to learn new paths of the medicine that will help you be an even greater asset to the web of life and to source. And that's when it gets really interesting. Yeah, and that's what I would wish that everyone that listens to this podcast and that's on the
Mhm.
channel and also on our Facebook group, that they would understand. Doing the Zoom, the one-to-one sessions, they're not about, well, let's do this and go through the motions. It's about how can we help unlock those things by being a guide for you in a safe space where you can change these agreements that have been ruling your life forever and now finally move forward and break that cycle because you learned the lesson.
So this talk has really been a talk about self-love for sure.
Yeah, yeah. If you can't love yourself, how can you love someone else? So being not only respectful for yourself, but again, I think a word that we've talked about a lot of times, especially in the past, is grace. Giving
Mm.
yourself to grace, giving grace to others, to
Mhm.
give them the space that they need in a loving kind of way, but more importantly, or just as importantly, giving yourself the grace to understand that you came from something and that you have the tools with the agreements to basically resolve that and to move forward. And to wherever that path leads you, to give yourself the grace to understand that there's certain things that you have to do for yourself in order to be present for other people in your life. And that grace is an important thing. Part of, one of the most important aspects of flying deer medicine is grace. It's not only the
Mhm.
heart connection, but it's also grace. How do we show grace? How do we receive grace? And that's something that
Right.
I had to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And compassion. It's a
yeah,
self-compassion as well, so that you can spread it to others.
right,
And and when we're talking about these relationships with others, these intimate relationships, right? You can only go as deep in your intimacy and love with others as far deep as you can go with yourself,
Yeah.
right? So the word intimacy sounds like into me, I see, right?
Hmm.
So
Right.
the more into yourself that you can see and illuminate, um, the better your relationships will be.
Right. So let's take that into me, I see. So when I go inside and I understand what the agreements are, I see where they came from and what they're doing to me. When I see this, I can free up that stuff and I am finally capable to be that loving person that I should have been if I was in a normal situation. I can
Mm-hmm.
unlock all those things in my character and my person that can enable me to be the person that I was meant to be, that we're all meant to be. We're supposed to be happy. We're supposed
Mm-hmm.
to be sharing that light. We're not supposed to be people that hate or that are negative. I'm not saying don't look at reality, but shaping our reality in a way that makes more sense, that is more positive, that has that compassion, that grace, that has that love and that understanding for others, because they're extensions of us too. So, and I think that's a good
Yeah.
spot to close
Yeah.
this one podcast. A very profound and very foundation. They're all profound, but I mean this one really hits deep.
They just keep getting better.
Yeah, I would hope so. Yeah, I mean I'm going to tell myself that they keep on getting better, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for watching.
Thanks everyone, and just remember, take a look at our Instagram. Take a look at our Shopify that's coming up pretty soon. We're going to have
Yes.
some stuff, some really good stuff for you, ranging from ebooks that are only available off of the site. One of them coming up is the Stoic Shaman. I'm almost completed that with that book, and that will go up on the website, I think, in the next few days.
That's
So,
exciting.
yeah, and then there's other books on Stoicism that I've incorporated some of the things that I've learned, and I think we're going to have some upcoming books on some of the secrets of the trade with maybe the teas and stuff like that we have,
Mm-hmm.
and a few other things. If you're interested, and I think everyone's interested, then check out our website when it's online for the Silver Crow Apothecary, I
Mm-hmm.
believe it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then also check out the Facebook page. So, what was it? The Social Network Shaman Silver Crow on Facebook. And if there's anything else that you'd like, just reach out to us on the YouTube channel or on our emails or on Instagram, or Godecker Michael is my Instagram. And what's your Instagram?
It is Melanie Ray Stewart. That's my name.
Okay, great. So those are some of the ways that you can contact us too, and just let us know what you think. Let us know what you need. When you'd like to book different sessions or check out the retreats that we're doing in corporate settings and in personal settings, just let us know. And with that, I hope that everyone finds their way to the light. I appreciate your time,
Mm.
and I look forward to seeing you all at some event or online or interact with you somewhere. With that,
Yes.
share the light. Bye.
Bye, everyone.